In 1954, a struggling milkshake machine salesman named Ray Kroc convinced two brothers to let him franchise their burger stand nationwide. Everyone assumes that's the whole story, a hamburger chain that got very good at selling hamburgers. Here's the sentence Kroc himself used to describe what he'd actually built on record, in his own words. "We're not in the hamburger business. We're in the real estate business." He wasn't exaggerating for effect. In 2025, McDonald's collected $16.5 billion in revenue from its franchised restaurants and turned that into $13.9 billion in profit, a margin above 80%, a number that has nothing to do with how many Big Macs anyone sold that year. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly how a fast food company quietly became one of the largest commercial landlords on the planet, and why the burgers were never really the point. Start with the man almost nobody credits for this, because Ray Kroc didn't invent the real estate strategy alone. In the mid-1950s, a financial consultant named Harry Sonneborn looked at how thin the profit margins were on selling hamburgers directly and proposed something different. Instead of McDonald's simply franchising the brand and collecting a royalty on sales, the company would acquire or lease the land and buildings underneath each restaurant itself, then sublease that same property back to the franchisee at a markup. The franchisee still ran the restaurant, still bought the ingredients, still hired the staff, and still kept whatever profit was left after paying two separate bills to the same parent company. One bill for the right to use the McDonald's name and system, a second, entirely separate bill for the ground beneath their own restaurant. Now look at exactly how that second bill works, because the structure itself is what makes this business nearly bulletproof. McDonald's uses what's called a triple net lease, meaning the franchisee, not McDonald's, is responsible for property taxes, building insurance, and maintenance on top of the base rent. McDonald's collects the income from the real estate without carrying the operating costs of owning it in the traditional sense. And the leases include indexation clauses, meaning rent gets revised annually based on inflation and on the franchisee's own sales performance. So even in a year when a specific franchisee is struggling to turn a profit on food costs and labor, the rent payment to McDonald's corporate keeps arriving, tied to a formula, not to how the burgers actually sold that month. Here's the site selection mechanism. Almost nobody outside real estate circles understands about why McDonald's real estate holds its value so reliably. Before McDonald's will even consider a location, the company runs a detailed analysis of pedestrian flow, local demographics, nearby development plans, and daily vehicle traffic, with a minimum threshold of roughly 20,000 cars passing the site every single day. That filter alone eliminates the vast majority of available commercial real estate before McDonald's ever signs a lease or a purchase agreement. The company isn't gambling on locations. It's applying the same site selection discipline a serious institutional real estate investor would use. Decades before most fast food competitors thought about property analytics at all, and it's compounded that discipline, one site at a time, since the 1950s. The scale this produced by now is genuinely staggering. As of the most recent count, McDonald's operates more than 41,000 restaurants across 119 countries, with roughly 95% of them run by franchisees rather than the company itself. McDonald's owns approximately 45% of the land and 70% of the buildings that house those restaurants worldwide. Its real estate company manages a property portfolio valued above $40 billion, generating average annual returns in the high single digits purely from the property itself, separate from anything happening at the cash register. In 2025, rental income alone contributed more to McDonald's franchise profit than royalties did, a fact that inverts almost everyone's assumption about where a burger company actually makes its money. Now here's what happens to a competitor that tries to run the franchise playbook without ever building the real estate engine underneath it. Quiznos, once the second largest submarine sandwich chain in North America, with close to 4,700 locations and roughly $2 billion in annual system revenue at its 2007 peak, built its entire profit model around something completely different. Instead of collecting rent, Quiznos required franchisees to buy ingredients and supplies through a company-owned distribution subsidiary, marking up the cost of doing business rather than collecting a steady, predictable property income. When a 2006 leveraged buyout loaded the company with $600 million in debt, later growing past $800 million after a 2008 refinancing, Quiznos had no real estate income cushion to absorb the pressure. Franchisees, squeezed by inflated supply costs and unable to turn a real profit, filed lawsuits that eventually cost the company more than $300 million in settlements, covering thousands of operators. Locations closed, territory shrank. Brand visibility collapsed along with it, and by the time Quiznos filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2014, the chain was already a shadow of its former size. Today, fewer than 200 locations remain, a decline of more than 96% from its peak. Same industry, same franchise model on paper. One company built a real estate empire underneath its brand and treated rent as the stable core of the business. The other built a supply chain markup scheme on top of an empty foundation, and when the debt came due, there was no property income sitting underneath it to absorb the shock. So here's the final balance sheet, collapsed into one sentence. A triple net lease structure, indexed to inflation and franchisee sales, layered underneath one of the most disciplined site selection processes in commercial real estate, turned a hamburger company into a landlord collecting rent regardless of how any single restaurant's food sales actually performed that quarter. And the margin on that rental income, above 80%, dwarfs anything the burgers themselves could ever produce on their own. Ray Kroc said the quiet part out loud decades before anyone was ready to hear it. The 15-cent hamburger was never the business. It was simply the most reliable way to guarantee a tenant would keep showing up to pay the rent.